So, I don't know if you know this, but there's a list of 10 demands out there on the internet entitled, White People, here are 10 requests from a Black Lives Matter leader.
What? What the fuck?
So, thought we'd go through them, and then there's a video to this that goes with it. So we're gonna tackle that too. We're being very productive today. Kind of. There's actually an essay out there that has my name on it that needs a revision. Oh darn! White people, if you don't have any descendants, will your property to a black or brown family, preferably one that lives in generational poverty.
That's stupid. You're stupid. Stop being stupid.
We're gonna need some definitions here. Generational poverty is defined as a family having lived in poverty for at least 2 generations. Now, in terms of generational poverty, I will say that this is a rather tricky cycle to break, but it can be done. We actually know how to do it through one very simple method. Fostering education. It's the simplest, most direct, sustainable, and prolonged method of breaking the cycle of generational poverty. Without education, that knowledge of how to manage money and, make more money, bequeathing your property wouldn't do very much for a family in poverty for very long. What happens when the money from the will runs dry? What happens when you have to pay rent on that property or fix it? And not to mention, someone, somewhere, is going to have to pay all those bills and taxes that come with said property. Those don't just go away if it's a gift. Getting a white person to give you their money, property, etc. is a very temporary solution to a much more involved issue. The classic adage, give a man a fish, he eats for a day, teach a man to fish and he eats for his lifetime, well, that principle applies here. In fact, that's pretty much as direct as I can get without writing it on a sticky note, tacking it to a dog turd, and leaving it on your pillow for you to find when you crawl into bed tonight. White people, if you've inherited property you intend to sell upon acceptance, give it to a black or brown family. You're bound to make that money in some other white privileged way.
Did you just exhume my privilege?
It amuses me that she wants specifically white people to give up their possessions and land and money. I wonder, does she realize that the most well-off demographic in the United States is not white people, but in fact is Asians? To quote Pew Research, Asian income has been on par with or has exceeded white income since 1987, when comparable data for Asians became available. Why not demand money and property and shit from Asians? Would that make too much sense? Is it because that Asians were never oppressive? Because I beg to differ. So does the rape of Nanking. You know, the massacres and the rapes the Japanese committed against the Chinese during World War II? That's rather recent history. What's that I hear? The actions of Japanese in World War II are not attributable to all Asians, especially those in today's culture? You see, I can play devil's advocate very well, but I don't do it discriminately. Now, prepare your ear orifices and frontal lobes, my dudes, because learning time!
Turn to page 394.
It's the motherfucking Eagle Double G.
Everyone already knows the history of black people in the United States. Slavery, Civil War, Civil Rights Movement. They are beaten into our heads over and over again during those wonderful years of hell called public high school. If perhaps you were that kid that sat in the back and wiped his boogers on the wall and took naps and were not paying attention, allow me to remind you of a few very important dates. January 31st, 1865, and December 6th, 1865, otherwise known as the day Congress passed the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery, and the date that this amendment was ratified, respectively, 152 years ago. July 2nd, 1964, or the day that the Civil Rights Act was enacted. So these are mainstream public education things everyone is aware of, and are drilled into your head, oh so diligently, all the time, at least 3 times. The reason why probably has less to do with guilt tripping and more to do with the thought that those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. A saying we all know so well. Communism. Antifa. Oh, excuse me. Coming down with something. We're going to look at a different part of history that not many are too attuned to. You're about to get a crash course in U.S. history, the Asian edition. In the 1850s, the People versus Hall established that Chinese in the U.S. had no rights to testify against white citizens. 1870s, the Naturalization Act limited naturalization to African Americans, excluding Asians from receiving citizenship. 1882, you thought that the Muslims had it bad, wait until you hear about the Chinese Exclusion Act. And if you thought that white people rioting in Charlottesville was a new thing to America, you're in for a shock. 1885 and 1886, the anti-Chinese riots in Washington resulted in Chinatown in Seattle being burned down October 24th. 1905, the Japanese and Korean Exclusion League formed in San Francisco, and I thought my peers in high school were dicks. Oh, and then in 1907, The Japanese and Korean Exclusion League was renamed to be more inclusive and encompassed all Asians. How very thoughtful of them. 1942, Japanese internment begins, etc., etc. So let's be real, pre-civil rights America was shit to a lot of people, blacks and Asians included. No denying it, putting minority people at a disadvantage to their countrymen en masse. Yet there is no Asian Lives Matter movement demanding handouts or reparations for such atrocities. In fact, they don't even need those reparations because despite all of that adversity, somehow they are at the same or even higher economic status than white people in this country. Now, why am I bringing up the plights of Asians and blacks in the US, you may ask? Well, not because they're exactly comparable, but it does speak to my point, and that is this. Asians are 5% of the population, more of a minority than their black counterparts, who make up 12.6% of the population. Asians, who have faced hardships as well as setbacks as a demographic, yet somehow have managed to climb the ladder post the civil rights movement, and are more impressive than any other demographic in the US. I have to ask this one simple question. Is the system completely at fault for black hardships, or is there something else at play here? Just something to think about. If you're a developer or realty owner of a multifamily housing, build a sustainable complex in a black or brown blighted neighborhood and let black and brown people live in it for free. As I mentioned before, if the black and brown residents are residing in these complexes for free, then who is paying the bills that inevitably come along with such an arrangement? How thoroughly did you think this one through? White people, if you can afford to downsize, give up the home you own to a black or brown family, preferably a family from generational poverty. See, earlier point I made in the video, while also maybe including this point on top of it, perhaps consider reallocating your budget in order to better accommodate your lifestyle constraints. Put more emphasis on the necessities and education than perhaps frivolities. Let me tell you, it's hard, but it can be done. As a college student, I know this. White people, if any of the people you intend to leave your property to are racist assholes, change the will and will your property to a black or brown family, preferably a family from generational poverty. Again, see earlier point, but what about black racist people, like BLM members? Where do their relatives relocate their wills to? For real though, either no one is going to know the person is racist if they're being willed something from another person, or two, that person likely already shares their beliefs, so fat load of good a will is gonna do anyone. White people, rebudget your monthly so you can donate to black funds for land purchasing. No. I prefer not to donate money on principle, and here's why. I don't know where that money is going. It can be used for anything. There is little to no accountability, and it can be wasted rather easily. See, what I prefer to do is I donate blood. It's something that is in higher demand, as not all of the population is eligible to donate blood. Furthermore, my blood type O negative is a universal donor, so it's obviously more useful to people and in higher demand. Not to mention, only about 7% of the US population share my blood type, so it's even more necessary to donate. Furthermore, with blood, you know it's going to help somebody. Most likely, save a life. Unless vampires are a real thing.
What's next? It puts the lotion in the basket?
It wouldn't have to if it just stayed dead.
There's a bit more of a personal touch to it, to be honest. You're giving not just time, but a part of yourself to help someone in need. And I think that says a lot more. White people, especially women, because this is Yao's specialty. Nosy Jenny and meddling Kathy, get a racist fired. You know what the fuck they be saying. You are complicit when you ignore them. Get your boss fired because they racist too. So, I'm wondering why we changed language tracks so quickly. Did your editor just all of a sudden halfway through this give up? Did you get tired and have someone else write this for you halfway through? What happened? Either way, much effort, I'm impressed. If anything, you've further proven my point about the need for education. This is reminiscent of that lovely time in history we call the Red Scare, you know, that time when the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, worked to discredit and intimidate civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. because they thought he was a communist. Oh, and that's not even mentioning Joseph R. McCarthy, you know, the man who made a name for himself in American politics via heresy and intimidation, leveling charges against many celebrities, intellectuals, and all those people who disagreed with him as disloyal, effectively ruining their reputations and costing them their jobs. Remember what I said about those who don't understand history being doomed to repeat it? This list certainly will not age well. I'm calling it right here, right now. The justified, intolerant, and morally righteous right has made a pendulum swing in the direction of the left, if you hadn't noticed, my dudes. Backing up number 7, this should be easy, but all those sheetless Klan Nazis and other little dick white men will be returning to work. Get the ass fired too. Called the police even. They look suspicious. If we're going by Antifa standards, anyone with half a brain would fall under this umbrella term of Nazi Klan members. At least on the bright side, we're not discriminating who gets to be a Nazi and who doesn't. It's like we're on Oprah. You're a Nazi, and you're a Nazi, and you're a Nazi. Also, I thought Black Lives Matter hated the police. Why on earth would you endorse calling them? Okay, backing up number 8. If any white person at your work, or as you enter in spaces and you overhear a white person praising the actions from yesterday, first, get a pic. Get their name and more info. Hell, find out where they work. Get them fired. But certainly address them. And if you need to, you got hands, use them. And right here is where, if you weren't already, MLK would start doing somersaults in his grave. You've just condoned violence against another human being indiscriminately under only the condition that they are praising the actions from yesterday, assuming that you mean Charlottesville, during which there were a lot of actions from both sides that were rather disgusting to say the least. Effectively, you've ensured 3 things. That you, a BLM organizer and hence representative for your movement, have espoused that your movement seeks to violently move forward a political agenda via force. Essentially, you have placed your movement among such other groups as ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the Real Irish Republican Army. Congratulations, you're a terrorist group. You are by no means any better than any of your chosen opposition and effectively have dissolved any sincerity in your message. Because of your lack of clarity, anyone is fair game for that.
In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence.
Martin Luther King, August 28th, 1963, I have a dream. Commit to 2 things: fighting white supremacy where and how you can. This is not me taking up knitting unless you're making scarves for black and brown kids in need, and funding black and brown people and their work. Your priorities are rather disjointed, unclear, and to be frank, reminiscent of a narrow-minded, selfish person who doesn't know what they're talking about because they're either uninformed or don't care, making you either a fool or malicious. Either way, you're not helping anyone in the grand scheme of things. But that, in fact, is not the end of this, because there is more. Dear Chanel Helm, the author of this list, went on air to discuss this list, and I'd like to share it with you and my thoughts on it. I won't be going through it all because it's 12 minutes and this is already too long of a video. But I linked it in the description along with my sources and various other extras.
And I was just thinking about the reasons why we do this work, the reasons why we have to show up, the reasons why we demand restitution for economic inequality.
There's a simple explanation for this, because you have no desire to pursue betterment of your life in any other way than to guilt-trip the masses into spoon-feeding you a comfortable lifestyle.
And this isn't any type of new work, and I think that's what also makes it a little daunting, is knowing that, as people quote MLK actually, his "I Have a Dream" speech was about workers' rights, black workers' rights, and redeeming restitution for the work that we have committed, and making sure that we receive our due share.
Was it? Was it really? Because I have one hell of a quote for you.
We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating "for whites only." We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote.
Are you sure it was about restitution and workers' rights and not about human rights? That whole chunk of the speech where MLK is talking about a bad check that was returned insufficient funds, was a metaphor for the freedoms and inalienable rights promised in the Constitution. You know the ones. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. I don't see anywhere in that white people owe me land. Unless you can cite for me an instance where those black rights were violated illegally in direct opposition of the Constitution and have yet to be rectified or addressed by a court of law, then I am sorry, I am disinclined to believe you.
I think what we're seeing in the post is a very short way of saying the generalization around economic inequality for black and brown people in this country. It's not, like I said, it is not anything new. The redlining that took place mid-century, and then the way that we make sure that resources are restricted from black people when they uprise. And I think that's what's most interesting.
You know what I think was most interesting was that you make a point to say that resources are restricted from black people when they uprise. Now, that itself deserves its own strawman ceremony, since you haven't provided a legitimate example of such a thing occurring. In fact, I could come up with a host of examples to the contrary, in fact. For instance, in this country, blacks are the highest percentage of welfare recipients. In 2016, they were 39.6%, yet only made up 12.6% of the population. Yet somehow, according to you, these resources are restricted. That's not even the interesting part. What I find interesting is that you felt entitled enough to ask other people, citizens, just like you and me, to reallocate their own hard-earned money, land, etc., on the pure and simple basis that you're black and said person is white. Racist much?
And where I went with the rest of the post was there's some things that white people actually do need to do. They do need to let us know when people are being racist and when they're saying racist things. If you're in the workplace and someone says some racist things and you don't say anything, and then, you know, people of color, black people, brown people get employment there, and then they have to go through those things, that's traumatizing. That's not something that anybody wants to go through.
So question, is this applicable across all demographics? Like, are you going to tattle on blacks for being racist to whites, or are we coddling black people now for some reason? Because for some reason, unlike the rest of us, black people are incapable of dealing in a healthy way with the prejudices of their fellow man. Just curious, did you mean to infantilize black people?
That's the underlying notion of what a Nazi is. Someone who believes in a fascist governmental system underneath capitalist policies that want to destroy people that don't look like white racist men, essentially. Black and brown people have always had the brunt end of that for decades and centuries, and this is what we're looking at.
What did she just say?
That's the underlying notion of what a Nazi is. Someone who believes in a fascist governmental system underneath capitalist policies.
Nazis and capitalism.
That's the underlying notion of what a Nazi is.
Underneath capitalist policies.
Oh, hun, that's going to bite you in the ass later.
Jeffrey goes.
Nazis were capitalists? Is that what you're saying? Oh, sorry, I was saying you think that Nazis were capitalists?
That's not what I said.
Well, you said that when I asked what the definition of Nazis were, you talked about fascist people in a capitalist society. A fascist capitalist government, I believe, was your definition of Nazism. I'm just looking for a clarification on your definition of the word Nazi.
Okay. I gave it to you.
She doubles down. What was it I said about people not understanding history being doomed to repeat it?
That's what those I made them 10 on that Facebook post was actually talking about. We're looking at people who live in food apartheid, economic restraints, and even hypercriminalization. We're talking about like the reason, you know, Ferguson even exists. But I think that it's dangerous in a sense to say that what I wrote was racist or dangerous, because it wasn't in the least. And none of what I wrote was dangerous in the least. I think what's dangerous is the backlash that I am personally receiving from that.
She doesn't believe that what she wrote was at all racist or dangerous. Obvious racism aside, I'm going to address something a little bit different. Let me reiterate a point I made earlier about the initial list and why it's more dangerous and racist towards black people than it will ever be towards white people. It's both infantilizing and disenfranchising. It operates under the assumption that the monolith of black and brown people in the country are so incapable themselves of accruing this land and money and power that they need the great weighty to provide for them. If said dichotomy switched up a bit and say men were substituted for whites and women for blacks, and the same requests were being made by women, a feminist would argue that this is internalized misogyny. To adhere to any one of these requests, despite however good the intentions behind the list may be, would be to perpetuate a cycle of learned helplessness. Learned helplessness, of course, being that concept that states that if you, all your life, are continually exposed to adverse stimuli, that you're never able to escape, that when you get the chance to be away from that stimuli, you won't do anything. It's why an elephant who's been tied to a pole his entire life with only maybe 15 feet of slack won't ever venture past 15 feet from that pole when untied from that pole. In this case, said adverse stimuli would be being told that the white man is keeping you down all day, every day, no matter what you do, so don't even bother. This list doesn't help anyone do anything, and asking for handouts in lieu of breaking the cycle of learned helplessness does absolutely nothing except prolong it.
And when we talk about Nazis and punching Nazis, we are talking about white supremacy. White supremacy did deal some of the most deadliest types of genocide that our world has ever seen.
Please, honey, as an ethnically Polish woman whose people were actually subjected to Nazi genocide, at least 2.7 to 3.2 million, let me speak for myself, thank you very much. I don't need anyone else taking up my Polish space now, do I? Sure, there were a few black people interned and concentrated in camps during the war and a few killed, no denying it, but if you're going to have an origin story, don't make things up and re-center the victim narrative to tell it. If I as a white person cannot speak about racism and slavery, then you as a non-Slavic, non-Jewish person cannot speak on genocide. I mean, that's how it works, right? From each according to his privilege, to each according to his oppression. So I keep bringing up this point about Nazis because she keeps saying Nazis as if it's the literal Third Reich of Germany in all its SS glory, still in danger of taking over the world and establishing an Aryan ethno-state. When what she really means is neo-Nazis. You know, your average mother's basement dwelling, tiki torch wielding fringe outcast who has no friends or prospects and sits in the corner hating everything and everyone because of their social ineptitudes. Nazis, long gone demographic. Neo-Nazis certainly have no power here. And yes, I know I'm being nitpicky, but you can't say this many wrong things on air and not get called on all of them. Plus, I'm a detail-oriented loon, a control freak, and a perfectionist, and this is subpar social justicing at best, honestly. You could do so much better.
And Jake, you sit up here and you talk like you don't understand what a Nazi is. Let's remember where the word Nazi even comes from. It comes from Germanic people who were who proclaimed to have this superior race.
Actually, it's a term derived from the German words National Socialist, from the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Anyway, initially the party was created as the antithesis of communism, focusing on anti-big business, anti-bourgeoisie, and anti-capitalism. Of course, later on it shifted to anti-Semitism and anti-Marxism ideas, but the point still stands.
Redlining, keeping jobs away. We're talking about food apartheid. That is real.
So here's some more information we need to know before I can go apeshit with the debunking. Food apartheid is a relentless social construct that devalues human beings and assumes that people are unworthy of having access to nutritional food. Food apartheid affects people of all races, including poor white people, although black and brown people are affected disproportionately. You mean the concentrated presence of McDonald's and other fast food industries in black communities? I got news for you, hon. There are 15,828 in the US alone. And oh boy, I get to use statistics and my graphs. Yes. Based on 2 data collections done in 2015, I compiled various percentages based on the number of McDonald's locations in a particular state and the percentages of black people in said state. I use McDonald's because it's essentially the fast food location. I could easily find their data. Everyone has had McDonald's at least once in their life, and according to Business Insider, in 2015 it was ranked number 1 in the list of the 20 most successful fast food chains in America. Then I put them into a graph, and this is what it looks like. Now, as you can see, blue is percentage of black people, green is percentage of McDonald's, out of all the ones in North America. For brevity, I limited my analysis to 8 of the states, my method of selection being that the first 5 states, California, Texas, Florida, Ohio, and New York, are the top 5 ranking in terms of number of McDonald's that they have compared to the rest of the 50 states. I will later refer to them as the Big 5. The last 3 states were included for comparison reasons, those being Mississippi, which had the highest percentage of black people, Montana, which had the lowest percentage of black people, and North Dakota, which had the lowest number of McDonald's, because we have the highest number of McDonald's on one end and we need the lowest one for comparison. Now, you will notice that Mississippi, which has the highest percentage of black people of all the states, at 37.4%, has a rather low number of McDonald's, when compared to the top states. In fact, when compared to the rest of the US, Mississippi came in 32nd in terms of McDonald's locations. Also, you will notice that the highest number of McDonald's locations are in the state of California, is 9.42%. Yet at the same time, of the big 5 states I mentioned earlier, it has the lowest percentage of the black population at 5.8%. I ask you, can we really say?
We're talking about food apartheid. That is real.
Can we honestly? Based on the data I presented you with, if America were engaged in a food apartheid of black people, wouldn't the most number of McDonald's be located in Mississippi? See, the difference between Chanel Helm and I is that I don't have to espouse violent or racist rhetoric to prove anyone wrong. All I need is a fucking graph. Alrighty, if you like my content, please consider perhaps supporting me on Patreon or through Teespring. Links to all that in the description. However, if you like my content, but not necessarily that much, then please, 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 like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much, my dudes. Shuttle and have a nice day.